Hi, I'm Lara and this is tropetrinitytrilogy, and today I'll be reviewing The Vagrant by Peter Newman. So this book is an adult sci-fi fantasy post-apocalyptic story. So part of the reason I wanted to read this was because I was getting pretty tired of all the YA books. They have a lot of the same tropes and cliches, and this book was really refreshing. Now, I don't want to spoil this book, so I'm just going to read the back as the summary, because this book is very mysterious and you learn a lot as you read through it. So the back of the book says, "The vagrant is his name, he has no other. Friendless and alone, he walks a desolate, war-torn landscape. His purpose is to reach the shining city and deliver the only weapon that may make the difference in the war. But the shining city is far away, and the world is a very dangerous place." I find that fact to be pretty interesting and a little intense, which is exactly what I like. And to give a bit more detail, that is the vagrant, who is a silent protagonist who is fighting his way through this post-apocalyptic world, and he is also carrying a little baby with him all the way through. Since the protagonist is silent and who he travels with is a baby for most of the time, it does take a bit to get into the characters, due to the fact they can't really talk and have conversations, so their personality isn't really as prevalent. And to be honest, when I first started reading this, I had trouble getting into it because the characters weren't detailed or fleshed out enough for me, so I had trouble getting into it. The vagrant himself as a protagonist, he's not that interesting or complex. He's pretty basic, pretty moral, and doesn't have that much personality. I do think part of that, and I do think that a silent protagonist could have a lot of personality, and I do think that for what it is, the author does a silent protagonist well. However, I still think the vagrant could have had a bit more personality, a bit more complex. There could have been more creative ways utilized to depict his personality than was shown. I did find a lot of the side characters interesting. Most of the side characters were kind of I didn't care about them. However, there were some I did get really invested in and found really interesting. However, and I definitely think the side characters' interactions with the vagrant was what made me invested in the vagrant and the story, as opposed to the vagrant himself. However, as the story went along, I spent more time with these characters and met new characters. I got really attached into these characters. So I definitely say this is a book that takes a bit to get into, especially because the writing style is very poetic, pretty, but also very sometimes vague and not as detailed. Another cool thing about this world is that the fantasy elements and sci-fi elements are very unique. A lot of fantasy books have the classic elves, dwarves, and those are fine, but it's nice to see something new. However, due to the fact that the elements in this story are these weird demonic type things, it means that going into the story, I don't know anything about them, and it takes more effort to learn and understand what is going on in this. So at the beginning of the story, a lot of the elements felt a bit like, okay, that's interesting, but it's hard to imagine. However, by the end of the story, I grasped everything perfectly well, and this really unique fantasy elements are really cool, dark, and disturbing, and I definitely recommend this for anyone who wants a dark fantasy or sci-fi. Also, one thing is this book is told in third-person present tense, which is something I've never really read before, and it took me a bit to get into it. However, it doesn't take away from the story if you do have particularness about the tense and writing style, and I was able to get into it. And also, this book is told through a current timeline and then past events about what happened before the story occurred. And I found it very interesting in the past, and I definitely think the backstory for this book was very important in establishing the different magic and technology about the world, and in moving the plot and letting the readers know more about the protagonist, who couldn't really say his backstory because he's a silent protagonist. So I will say this book does take a bit of patience and effort to get into. However, once you get into it, it is a really fast-paced, action-packed book. It doesn't have a lot of slow info dump moments, which also is part of the reason why it took a bit longer for me to understand everything. However, this book is entertaining and it is not bogged down by any slow, pointless scenes or moments. Even though I keep saying this book is dark and like creepy, this book also has some really fun and lighthearted moments, especially since there's a baby and there's a lot of cute baby things. And I really appreciate a book that can go really dark and really funny at the same time. I don't want to name characters because it's kind of spoilery, but I did like the side characters I got to know in this. I found one to be pretty funny and he was interesting, and then there was another who I got really attached to because I have a preference for big scarred characters with tragic backstories, and I really like that character. And honestly, at the beginning of the book, when characters got hurt, it was kind of like I didn't get attached to them, but by the end, I got upset when characters got hurt because I started to get really invested in them. This book is definitely really intense at times, but it's also really funny and heartwarming at others. So I definitely recommend this book for anyone who likes dark fantasy but also wants all the different emotions life brings to people. And I found that to be very genuine and realistic, because even though this is a really dark post-apocalyptic world, people still have genuine nice moments and are kind to each other, and there's a baby and it's adorable. And I also really like what a baby in a post-apocalyptic world represents in a thematic standpoint. So again, I recommend this. I do think even though it was hard to get into, it is actually a very fast-paced and quick read, and it's very enjoyable. So again, I highly recommend it if you want to read a dark fantasy with some funny, lighthearted moments. Cue the more in-depth analysis. Now, that's all I have to say, but if there's anyone that's still a bit on edge, I want to read this paragraph that I think is really nice and really got me into the book, where I was like, dang, this is good writing. Stick-like people and bloated flies gather in the twilight, both drawn to the still warm corpse of the dog spawn. By morning they have picked the bones clean. By afternoon half the people have died, their stomachs unable to accept the rich meat. By evening their skeletons are bartered over by necro-traders. In New Horizon, nothing is wasted. And I found that paragraph to give a very good representation of what this world is like, and also a really cool example of the writing style in this book. So I highly recommend this book for anyone wanting to read a dark fantasy, and also anyone wanting to read something unique. I've also did not see a lot of tropes I'm kind of getting tired of in other books, which was a nice change of pace. And I also really appreciate how this author went hardcore in creating his own fantasy creatures and developing their backstories and the rules for them. And it was really creepy, unique, and interesting, and I really enjoyed that. So that's all I have to say for now. I hope you enjoyed this quick review. I usually write a script for when I review books, but I did not today, so hopefully this isn't a complete mess. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.